to another episode of Global Women Enrichment Podcast. We are so excited to have some guests return with us today. So we have Nate and Nicholas, but we also have Jean who's joined us. Can you tell us a little bit about you so the audience can get to meet you?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Jean Belazaire. I'm a corporate banker with about 25 years of experience. I've lived in South Florida for 16 years. I work for Santander Bank, one of the largest banks in the world. I'm married with 3 beautiful daughters and 1 granddaughter. So, and I live in Hollywood, Florida. So it's an honor and a pleasure to join you all here today for this amazing experience.
Thank you so much. So today what we wanted to do is really focus in on the topic of emotional intelligence. And just to kind of level set us a little bit, when I look into emotional intelligence, it's really a skill set. And there, if you go to the dictionary, you go to research, you get these super long descriptions of what emotional intelligence is. And I kind of, thinking back to some of our previous conversations, wanting to fix it because I think too long and getting to the point sometimes is better. I boiled it down to you got to have a little bit of rum with your day. And I don't mean the alcohol. I'm talking, John's like, what, really? I kind of like the rum every day, right? Yeah. No, it's really, emotional intelligence is a skill set that allows you to really do these 3 things. Recognize what you're feeling, understand where it's coming from, and manage those emotions. And so if you're able to do that, that is the skill of emotional intelligence. Recognize where it's coming from, what's triggering it, understand why, and manage it. Because ultimately, when you look at emotional intelligence, the feelings, what you're feeling inside, whether it's excitement, whether it's anger, whether it's any one of those feelings, the way that you behave will determine what the outcome of those feelings are. Mm-hmm. Emotional intelligence is that pause to have a little bit of rum between the feelings, the emotions inside, and the outward behavior. So kind of just to level set in terms of emotional intelligence for our audience and understanding where we're coming from. So when you're thinking about emotional intelligence, Jana, I'll start it off with you. What do you think about in terms of when you see folks that just outwardly act on their emotions and behaviors? How does that come about, whether in personal or professional life?
An interesting question, and I'll attack the professional aspect first. I'm one. I think I'm a little passionate. So, it doesn't take much to trigger me. I mean, these are the new buzzwords, trigger me. But, and that's more on the personal side. But on the professional side, I always try to maintain my composure. Always keep your cool. And, you were taught, don't come off as angry. And in business, when I'm doing business, I need to sit down and understand some of these rules that, I deal in finances. Sometimes I'm delivering bad news, and that's not always pleasant. So, be prepared to accept, because, you're delivering the information in the news, and you can tell by physical attributes that, a person starts to slouch, or a person, So those are, as you described, the inner workings, and be prepared for it to come out. So that's on the professional side. So now when I'm having conversations with my spouse about things that are difficult, and we have been married for 14 years now, and the other thing I have to mention, this is second marriages for both of us. So we've learned in past experiences, but learning to read that person. Here she comes, the volcano's about to erupt, and and sometimes it doesn't erupt, and that's when it gets scary. So it's like, but it's about understanding that and how you deliver. We were talking about communication earlier, is how you deliver that message. I think that helps in managing the emotional output and input that goes into interactions on a personal level.
Well, managing that, how you're going to do that, that is emotional intelligence, right? Is having that intelligence to say, okay, how am I going to manage this based on the emotions that are coming? Nicholas, what do you think?
Man, I just listening to these guys talk, I'm thinking, if you want a concrete example of emotional intelligence and lack thereof, like I would be the lack thereof. These guys have been married for like 3 times longer. I guess, I really like your definition. That's a good definition of emotional intelligence. As soon as you said that word at the beginning, I'm just like, I have no idea what that means, but this really gives me a lot to reflect on. One of the things that I think of when it comes to acting on your emotions is I tend to have a negative attitude about that. I'm a very emotional person, but my general perspective on myself and even, to younger men is that hey, in the grand scheme of things, your feelings do not matter a lot. When you don't feel like going to work in the morning, it doesn't matter. Like when you don't feel like taking care of your wife and taking care of your kids and taking care of your responsibilities, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, what's going to matter and what's going to determine the person that you're going to become is going to be you knowing what is right and you acting on those things. So typically my stance on acting out of emotion when it comes to important things in life is that your emotions in the grand scheme of things do not matter a whole lot. But I do think that you living out, your values that are right are going to shape your emotions. Like I love things now that I did not love when I was younger. And I think that comes through practice, it comes through patience, it comes through developing relationships with mature men and allowing them to pour into you. And so grand scheme of things, I think my attitude, I don't know if this is right or wrong, I don't know if it's emotionally intelligent, but my grand scheme of things idea is that your emotions don't really matter a whole lot, right? At least for men. But you acting out on what what is right is going to impact and shape the things that you love and the way that you feel about certain things. And so I would say that's kind of just my 2 cents on it. But again, this might not be all that.
Well, what's your perspective on whether emotions matter for men or not?
I differ a little bit in that. I think they do matter. They matter a lot. And I'll tell you why I feel that way. And so you mentioned this difference between how you're feeling and how you outwardly behave. So if you ask my wife and my children, they will say, oh, here it's Mr. Chill, right? Because for them, they know that there's this calmness about how I approach things. But that buys me time.
Yes.
Is what that is. Buys me the time to try to understand, because my emotion may not be what I want to portray, and it may not be what reinforces and gets us to the right place. So I may not feel the right way about something. I'll give you a small example, which is I'll use a work example. If someone is coming to me and sharing ideas, and my emotional reaction might be, no way, right? I can't roll eyes, and why? Because I do not want to ever, squash someone's desire to want to share thoughts and ideas and information. That's a lot more important than how I might feel about this particular subject or this particular example. And so the reason I say that the emotions do matter is because if I show the wrong one, I can influence in the wrong way. And in my role as a husband and a father, and in my role as a leader in my workplace, my emotions, how I feel about something, will influence others and what they're doing. And so I need to be sure, am I in the right spot? And are my emotions going to lead us to the right place?
Yeah. So for what? Oh, I'm sorry. Am I allowed to ask questions?
Of course, go ahead.
So for what you're saying, I'm sorry, this is not my podcast. So for what you're saying is they matter, but they matter because if you don't know yourself, you're not going to be able to control, the way that you manage those emotions and manifest them before others when it comes to doing the things that you have to do.
Or you might unintentionally portray a message that you don't want.
I would say that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. When I think of adding that element of management to emotional intelligence is just a new thing for me, because when I think of just acting on emotions, I think that means you don't have that component of management to it. But what you're saying is that component is included within it.
Yes.
And so that's just new.
That's what makes it intelligent.
That's what makes it intelligent, is that management. And to your point on being Mr. Chill and buying time, that is emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
Emotional intelligence is if you are using that pause between the feelings and the outward display of whatever kind of behavior that is, that gap in time, that's buying you time to decide how to react. It's also the intelligent component, right? That's when I'm describing between the inward and the outward, that gap in time is the ability to recognize what is going on here, understand what it's all about, and then managing it.
Right.
And yeah, go ahead, Vinoria.
I wear my emotions on my sleeve, especially personally. Professionally, I cannot do that. I'm like the opposite. I'm like stone cold.
Yeah.
Right? I had management tell me one time I am too professional. But when it comes to business, that's the only way that I maybe I do that as a protective mechanism. I don't know. But because if I operate in business the way I operate personally, I probably won't have a job, because I'll tell everybody about themselves, right? So I'm just keeping it real, and so I just try to just stay focused and not show any emotions at all. So I don't know whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? You had the wrong definition.
Yeah, so I think it is important to display emotions. And how you manage those emotions, going back to the management piece, is what's important. Because if every single time that as a leader somebody comes to you and you are always just like this and you show absolutely no emotion, you're not giving any of those nonverbal cues to your team to understand, okay, how is this landing? How is this not landing? And the other part of that is the aspect of, if you have an emotionally intelligent workforce, you actually have more engagement within your corporation.
So let me just correct it. It's not that like I'm stone cold 100%.
Yeah.
I am stone cold. Like if there is something that I need to handle, and I have a low tolerance for hearing people speak things to me that really doesn't make any sense. I'm just keeping it real. I have a low tolerance for that, right? So if I do not bring on that protective mechanism, then like I may tell my direct report or I may tell my manager something that I shouldn't. You see what I'm saying? So it's just a protective mechanism. It's not like I'm stone cold. On the floor, regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. Sandra, thoughts on the conversation so far?
I think I know that people who don't have the pause,
Yeah.
we label them as crazy. We label them as the mad black woman. Okay? So I think it's important that as we become more intelligent about emotions, and the way you described it is beautiful, it's stepping aside, taking the pause. I like the way Nate described it, of taking that pause and where is this coming from? What am I listening to? What is it I need to hear? Especially if we're leaders. And as I look around the table, we're all leaders. And we influence people, and we can kill a dream if we're not careful. And so we have the responsibility. I was thinking about that this morning, that as we climb these so-called ladders, we realize that the rungs are lower, they're not higher, because we now have this tremendous responsibility to affect other people's dreams.
Yes.
So emotional intelligence demands intelligence. And we have those in the society who couldn't care about the intelligence. We just need to let you know how we feel.
Right.
Yeah.
And we need to understand that. And if we have the power to influence the intelligence, we should do that.
Yes.
But all emotions matter. We are emotional beings. We are created with these emotions. And they go from sad, and depressed to manic joy. Okay? And we have to find a balance along that continuum and use it effectively. We see in the society today a lot of wrong use of emotion.
Yes.
And it's causing death. But we, all of us here, we influence. We have a circle of influence. We have people who report to us, and we need to find ways to help them become more emotionally intelligent. It's a beautiful storyline.
Yes. So two things I want to come to. One is, I will tell you, I do believe that all emotions matter, to Sandra's point. And I say that because research has found that the more you repress the emotions because you feel that my emotions don't matter, it's more of getting it done or getting it fixed. The more you repress those emotions, eventually it does become a volcano.
It explodes.
And it explodes. And so really understanding your emotions and validating your emotions is important. Because if you're just kind of taking it and taking it and taking it and saying my emotions don't matter, it will cause an eruption. Now, I get totally what you're saying. At the end of the day, if we don't feel like waking up in the morning and going to work, it doesn't matter what you feel in that instance because you still got to provide, right? However, in the grander scheme of things, emotions do matter. And I think that the other point that you're trying to make, which I'd love to explore a little bit more, is I'll call it the hijacking of emotions in culture today, where if you stop and you look at how we're using emotions, everybody's offended by everything. And I will tell you that vocalizing that something is wrong for you or something has offended you is important. Hijacking that to get to an agenda, I think, is a different thing. That using those emotions is not emotional intelligence. That is emotional hijacking.
Cancel culture.
Cancel
That's what
culture.
that's about.
Yes.
Canceling those cultures.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
No, it's funny. I was listening to Sandra, and it almost feels like society prizes the lack of emotional intelligence. Like everybody's screaming. Everybody, if somebody's thoughtful, they call them aloof and not caring, non-emotional. It seems like our society today more and more is taking the intelligence out of the emotion and just it's all emotion. And the more, and it's played out on social media. Everybody has a TikTok or they're going live on Facebook and to express their emotions. But again, I just feel we need a little bit more intelligence in the emotions. So, because at this point, something's going to happen. And we've seen the consequences of letting our emotions go wild. January 6th and wars and all that is about not having that pause, let me take a minute. Let me understand what that other person is saying so I can react. It may not be what that person wants to hear or understand, but it's that pause that gives you time to both kind of navigate that space.
I have a question. I don't know if this is emotional intelligence or not, but and I'm going to compare men to women. Women, they don't have a problem in showing their emotion and crying, right? Men, for some reason, think that if you cry, it's a sign of weakness. How do you guys feel about that? Is that because that's how men have been brought up, that little boys don't cry, you don't show your feelings? I mean, that's a sign of weakness. What are your thoughts, men?
If I saw my son crying about something that he should not be crying about, I would tell him stop. Like, you just need to stop. You need to get over it.
And why is that?
Well, because I would think that the reason he would be doing that would be to draw more attention to his situation. And so that's granted, like, something that he should not be crying about. If it was something that was serious, like where he was actually, hurt or harmed in some way, obviously, that would not be my response.
So you're thinking only if it's physical.
Oh, no, it could be emotional as well. Maybe something that was actually, damaging to him.
Okay. But
if it was like, I wanted those cookies and I couldn't get them, so I need to start crying or, something like that. But I bring that up just to bring it to the point that I think that might come from that, that to a certain extent, I think as younger boys and younger men, you're just kind of told that, hey, not everything is worth crying about. And so, there's probably certain situations where that might be permissible and there's others where it's not. To get back to, if it's okay, to what you guys were talking about, emotions being hijacked, is I think that's really one of the biggest problems facing our youth today. Is that I just call it manipulation. People would rather manipulate them than to ask them to use their brains and think about why they believe why they think and why they do things that they do. And I'll even tell our students sometimes, they'll say things like, oh, I just feel A, B, and C. And I just tell them, like, I'm glad you feel that way. Maybe your feelings are tracking what is true and what you know is right, but I want to know what you think. And that's obviously not to just disregard their feelings in general, because those could very well much be tracking with what is true. But I think they've just kind of been bombarded with this message that their feelings are like priority number one, and that therefore gives them a reason to make the decisions that they're going to make. And it's just not a good reason in most cases,
So can I go back to the cry? Because I want to hear from these men why men do not cry. I really want to hear that answer.
So in my home, I was notorious for saying, crying is for boo-boos.
Oh my God.
And I think it points to this exact question that you're asking, and why would I say that? And so it kind of draws upon some of what we were talking about before, this kind of, I want to fix it mentality. And I do have tear ducts, so they do get used on occasion. But it's this orientation of, like, that's not actually solving my problem. That's not actually going to make anything different. I've learned over time that yes, it can fix some things, right? It's a release, and I can feel better, and by feeling better, I'm in a better state of mind to be able to do something. But that doesn't mean that it's my default setting. And so my default setting would be, when you say, is that okay? I don't know that's a sign of weakness. Again, through life experience, you learn that it's a way in which people process things, but it's not my natural orientation. And so, I think it's rooted in some of these differences on how we deal with issues and challenges.
Now, I might even take it a step further, that if you don't understand that there is an appropriate time for mourning, like, for example, the loss of a loved one, or, if you were actually harmed in a way that significantly impacted you, and you don't understand that you have cause for mourning and that you should take time to mourn what has just happened, then that might be a sign of emotional weakness.
But if your spouse says something to you that is hurtful, would you cry?
If she said something to me that I found was hurtful, probably not. That'd just not be a situation where I think my automatic reaction would be to cry. It might throw me off a bit. I don't think my reaction would be to cry yet. But I'm just saying, I think that there are things where I think, like, you should mourn what has happened. And if you aren't able to put yourself in that mindset, then that's probably a sign of some kind of weakness.
But I think we're assuming that if my spouse says something harmful to me, I'm going to cry. I think more like a volcano would do. There won't be any tears. It's going to be an attack. It's going to be all-out war. I'm just being honest. I'm not going to cry. The things I cry about are the things that hurt the world. It's the horrible things in the world, And I think that comes with age. There's a socialization as we're growing up that allow girls to cry and boys shouldn't cry. Well, I think that process has socialized me not to cry. So that you understand that when I speak, it matters. So for me, no matter how difficult work is, I'm not going to cry in front of anybody in the job.
Oh, no.
But I may find my doctor's office in private and say, boss, they're killing me. Or work is rough over there. And he'll say to me, as he did many years ago, you are too sweet for this. You need to step down out of that position. And I don't regret that decision to this day. But in front of the hostility, in front of the power, I stood powerful. I'm not going to shed a tear.
Right.
Yeah. Jean, what do you think about the crying aspect?
Well, I think I'm a little different than everybody. I cry. It depends. It depends, and it depends. A perfect example. I was looking at a Norman Rockwell exhibit at the Fort Lauderdale Museum, and there's this portrait of this young. It's the story of the first child that the black child that the white police officers, when integration started in the schools, this little girl with her little braids and the painting, and these 4, U.S. Marshals escorting her. See, I'm telling you, and I'm getting goosebumps. Escorting her to school. I saw that portrait, and I just
tears came.
It just came.
That's what I'm talking about. That's emotional intelligence.
I'll be watching any movie that has a father-daughter theme, and then I just, I'm like, I'm like, boo-hoo. Boo-hoo it, and again, and maybe for me, it comes back to my parents were married for 56 years before my mother passed. My father at 88 is still active and kicking. My mother was the 8th of 20. Okay, and her mother died when she was like 7, right? And my father, they both lost their mother at a young age, but my father was raised by his father. And growing up, my mother didn't have time for that. She's a doctor, she's a pediatrician, blah, blah, and she's very focused, very driven. But my father was a sensitive one, and so I guess seeing my dad, in certain circumstances throughout our lives, shed a tear, I felt it was okay if I'm not gonna cry for everything, but there's certain things that will literally trigger some emotions that, a movie, watching my daughter graduate from, she has, one of them has a learning disability, from high school,
Nate, you have 2 graduations coming up. You're going to shed a tear?
I have 2. I don't know. I don't know. We're going to find out soon.
Yes.
But I do think in terms of of when I would find myself most emotional, touches on these pieces of seeing suffering, and then seeing great acts of kindness and love.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Those kind of 2 extremes for me would be those moments. Yeah. Then my tear ducts might get fired a little bit. So,
I would say for me, this is weird, but it's true. Like kind of what you said with the mother-daughter thing, or with the father-daughter thing. If I see grown men cry, it always gets me every single time. Yeah. Like. You could be crying about like the movie 13 going on 30, bro. It wouldn't even matter. If I see that, I'll be like, dang, that got him, man. That got. And so it gets me, man, because it's like, I know it's hitting deep,
Yeah.
And if I was being completely honest, because you asked me, am I going to cry? Like, I am a lot more likely to play that out before we get there, cry in private, so that I could
Be strong.
play the role that my family would expect of me. Not saying it's the right one. It's just what, right? This conditioning piece, whatever, and expectations, and to be a source of strength for everyone on that day. That would be a lot more likely of how I would handle it.
It's real.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for this really intelligent conversation around emotional intelligence. It's been very eye-opening for me, even someone who's constantly studying about emotional intelligence. So thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Nate. And thank you, John, for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you again real soon. Remember to visit us at GWEnrichment.com.